Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Canada's Real Deal. I'm your host, Anuj Dogra, and I'm a real estate broker in the Greater Toronto Area.
And my name is Anika, and I am a mortgage agent level 2 in Ontario. And today we have a very special guest on our podcast. Please welcome Daniel Foch.
Hey, Daniel Foch here. I am a real estate broker in the GTA as well, although have accidentally fallen into kind of being like a realtor across Canada and doing research work, just analyzing Canada's housing market. And so that's kind of the other thing that I do. I'm director of economic research at a company called Rare Real Estate and host of the Canadian Real Estate Investor Podcast.
Which is Canada's number 1 real estate podcast, if I'm not wrong.
Currently, yeah. We're very fortunate in that way.
Don't be modest here.
We've been keeping an eye on you guys, though. That's why. No, there's a lot in the space, I find, and a lot of people doing great stuff. So I love doing this. I love talking to other hosts and just figuring out what's going on.
Yeah, definitely. I think the podcast space has really helped me enjoy what I'm doing because we actually get to research and learn things more than just doing the transactions or the deals, right?
Yeah, 100%. It's also like I find you can create a lot of value for your clients where you can just answer questions in like a really digestible format. Sometimes it's like a lot of people don't want you to call them and or text them or whatever. They just want to be able to like digest a little bit of content. So it's really changed the way that we actually like sell to clients per se.
Yeah, definitely. And I think in a time where everything's changing so much because of the housing shortage that we're having, this is a good way for people to keep themselves updated, whether they're listening in their cars or they're scared to ask questions. This is like a more comfortable space for them to get that information.
Yeah, 100%.
So, funny story, Anika and I actually met Daniel in person back in May at one of our brokerage's events. And he said that the market was actually going to go down. And the room full of realtors were disagreeing with you, but you turned out to be pretty on the nose. Why were you saying that back then?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think at that point you could tell that Canadians were tapped out on an income basis, right? Like people can only spend so much money on housing, and you could see household debt climbing. You could see mortgage delinquencies beginning to climb, and wages weren't climbing, but inflation and household debt servicing costs were climbing. And so we were sort of at that point, we were at the top end of what Canadians were capable of affording. And I think I mentioned in that discussion, and that was a little while ago now, it's not going to be a huge drop. Like we already saw a huge drop in 2022, right? But it's sort of a grind down where it's just, some people maybe downsizing to a house that they can afford, or, getting rid of the house because they can't afford the mortgage and going into a rental for a bit so they can kind of reconfigure their finances or whatever. We're not at the point where there's these catastrophic and like violent waves of volatility. It's just these like the thing that you hear or feel when you talk to other Canadians, like how everybody's financially stressed, how things are really difficult right now. People are having a hard time dealing with inflation. That is how it materializes in that kind of long, slow grind down. And it's not until that starts to go away, as we start to see our debt reduce, our incomes rise, maybe house prices come down a little bit, maybe mortgage rates come down a little bit, that people can actually afford to buy houses again. And that's when a recovery starts, right?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, you were pretty good with your prediction because even the following month, we see the stats now that 1 in 20 businesses even close their doors. So there's obviously some impact of that cost of borrowing and being able to like maintain just businesses, let alone their homes, right? They're not generating as much income from their businesses if everything's closing down. And yeah, it kind of spells doom for a lot of things.
Yeah. I think that that phenomena you're describing ends up being sort of like the last piece of what it looks like to end up in, like, let's call it a recession. And Canada, there's a very good chance that Canada can avoid a recession just based on government spending. Like right now, most of the job creation we're seeing is from the government sector, but also government spending on things like infrastructure, which will create jobs and businesses. So government spending and population growth, obviously we have some of the highest population growth in the world. And so even though we can probably avoid a recession, what we'll see is a GDP per capita recession, or I've been calling it a me-cession, it's a recession for individuals.
Yeah.
And that will kind of materialize in rising unemployment. And that's the last piece. Like Tiff Macklem said it himself when he was interviewed by Pierre Poilievre during the pandemic. He said, the biggest reason for Canadians not paying their mortgages would be if they don't have a job. And now we're at that, a lot of people don't have a job part. And if we see unemployment continue to rise, it's probably really the only major risk to like that remains to Canada's housing market. So I honestly am just watching unemployment the most closely right now.
Yeah, I mean, that's definitely a big part of the puzzle. And I think we're starting to see it, right? There's a whole bunch of insolvencies happening, like you mentioned. I'm definitely getting a lot of calls from people just trying to save their houses by whatever means necessary. What about you, Nuge? What do you think?
Me, when I'm on the market on showings, there's a lot of more power of sale listings coming up. I think we looked at the stats, more than doubled now. And there's lots of lenders repossessing homes now. But so what I'm thinking, since there's been 3 interest rate cuts and there's been promises of more just this year, what's it going to take then for people to have more faith in the economy and get buyers back into the market?
I think we'll need to see the metrics that you just described moving down, right? Like as long as distress is still rising, then we're not going to be in a market that's gaining confidence. Distress needs to be coming down and people need to be succeeding, right? Right now, people are failing financially in a lot of cases, unfortunately. I mean, and so if our failure rate is higher than our success rate, then people will lose confidence in the market. And we're not hearing about people, winning the lottery on a pre-con anymore. We're not hearing about people, flipping a property and making a ton of money. I personally haven't heard a really exceptionally good news story from a real estate investor in the last couple of years. So once that changes, and you'll feel it, like it'll be palpable in the market. You'll know when people are actually in recovery. The one thing that I will mention is that there's a period of time that happens before that when everyone is in despair, and that's usually the best time to actually make a purchase because it's before that recovery takes place. It's a tough one to time based on a consumer sentiment piece of the puzzle, but usually if you do the exact opposite of what the average Canadian is telling you to do, you'll probably fare reasonably well. So whenever it feels like everybody's given up, which I feel like we're honestly pretty close to that point, that's when I really think you'll see that turnaround take place.
Yeah, I think Nuge and I were talking that there's more showings happening, but not as many people buying yet. It's definitely turning into would you guys say it's a buyer's market right now?
It's been a buyer's market.
Yeah, for sure. 100%.
Yeah.
And I think, I think that the funny part was like before, I think we've been in a like behaviorally a buyer's market for a while. I think the data points are tough to use. Like you would use your historic data of like days on market months of inventory or sales to new listings ratio.
Exactly.
But the challenge is like our market is so fast paced. Like the flow of information now is like, it used to be, even 5 years ago, it was like somebody would see a listing. I would have emailed it to them through the Treb back end. And then they would send me an email response about it. And then they would ask me to, some questions, and then they would book a showing. And now it's like 5 days and they've gone to go and see the property. Now that's like somebody sees a listing, they go pull it up on House Sigma or whatever. And then they know all of the information that they possibly need to know, including what it last sold for. And then they book a showing with you, and they've seen the property and know what they have an idea of what they want to pay for it within 24 to 48 hours of that listing. And so the timelines compressing, I think, have kind of skewed the ability for those metrics to be valuable in determining whether or not we're in a buyer's market. So I would say, I would say from a data perspective, with how quickly the market moves right now, I think even statistically, we're probably in a buyer's market. The difference I'm seeing today is properties are spending a lot more time on the market. So supply is beginning to accumulate. And I think the big reason for that is last year, buyers were still like hungover from 2022, 2021. Like, even though it was a buyer's market, they didn't treat it like it was a buyer's market, right?
Yeah.
They were like not looking at all of the listings. They weren't negotiating with sellers. They weren't submitting lowball offers. And those are the necessary pieces of the puzzle for the market to actually kind of like, or for buyers to get out there and get a good deal, right? And that, I think, is what we're seeing now. People are shopping around, they're trying to get a good deal, properties are selling under asking, etc.
Yeah. Do you guys think that because they have so much information in this day and age that it's too much information, it's too difficult for them to make a decision, and that's part of why they're not acting fast enough and they might lose out on these good deals? Or do you think they should wait and see a little bit more?
I think it's definitely a component is that there's probably too much info in it, and it creates a bit of an analysis paralysis for people, to be honest.
Yeah.
I think there's too many options, right? Because they also recommend similar listings to them too. And these analytics that they have on these sites, it's not taking in the complete condition of the house or how desirable it is. It kind of just gives you a valuation. And from what I see, it's just a standard, this percentage increase or decrease. So it doesn't really give you a very accurate number for the house value. But trust me, for me, whenever I go to showings with my clients, they'll say, well, House Sigma says this value or something. And then either, it's goes way over or it goes under. So either way, they would have overpaid or they were completely wrong with their estimate, right? So
yeah, it definitely skews consumer expectations. I mean, the running joke, like in the US, is that Zillow's estimate has existed for such a long time, right? And it's always been, laughably inaccurate. To the point where like they got into the iBuying business using their own valuations and ended up like blowing up that business because they were not paying the right value for a property. They even had a bounty on it like 10 years ago to try and solve the problem to make it more accurate. But I mean, I've worked on a couple of those AVMs, and like the reality is Toronto's market is just too dynamic and too volatile to possibly be modeled using any logic. Like it's a completely irrational market, even in the best of times.
Really?
I swear mortgage agents use it to appraise.
We always actually go on House Sigma, look at the house value and be like, okay, the appraiser's probably going to take 10% less than this just because they always do.
Well, I think like lenders use AVMs, right? Like, like most lenders, when they do a desktop appraisal, that's using an AVM. It's basically just like, it's called a boosted regression. So it's just like a type of regression analysis that takes all of these variables from like Toronto Real Estate Board, et cetera, and plugs them in, and they have a value for every home in Canada at any given time. But the problem is like a piece of that will use something like the sale to list price ratio. And if that sale to list price ratio skews up 10, like, when you're in the ripping bull market, it's 110, 120%. And so this algorithm is reading that properties are climbing at 20% per transaction, right? Whereas on the way down, could be 90 or 98 or 97%. We're seeing some markets in the GTA. It kind of confuses their ability to use that metric properly. So
that makes a lot of sense why I always get so much pushback from people. I'm like, no, my house is worth this much. How could it come down this low? Now I kind of have a better understanding of why it does not make sense.
Yeah, that's why I'm always saying, no, this is completely off.
Yeah.